All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Madison Rich. I am the program manager for Healthy KC and Gen KC at the KC Chamber. Welcome to our first ever virtual networking forum on the topic of leadership behaviors, the critical factor for increased workforce well-being, engagement, and performance. You can see on the screen there our presenters and our moderators, which they will introduce themselves here in a moment. But I just wanted to welcome you all. Thank you for participating in this webinar. It will be recorded, so we will share the recorded version of this. If you have to hop off early or if you'd like to share with anyone, we'll make sure you guys get it. And I also just wanted to quickly thank our sponsors. So on our next slide here, we have all of our Healthy KC sponsors. So thank you to them for all that they do, especially Blue Cross Blue Shield, Reach Healthcare Foundation, and Locked In. And then on the top there, you'll see our event partners. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dan McDonough. He is the president of the Kansas City chapter of the Academy of Culture Ambassadors. He will be your moderator today. So Dan, kicking it to you.
Hey, thank you. Welcome everybody. How about another web conference? Remember when you went to a web conference about once every 2 or 3 weeks, and now you have to decide between 4 and 5 and 6 a day almost, because that's where we are. So we really thank you for being here. We want to thank Madison, and thanks to the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce Healthy KC initiative for bringing us all together this afternoon. You know, for several years now, Healthy KC has led the way in a collaborative, community-wide partnership to create a culture of health and well-being, wellness in Greater Kansas City. And in Kansas City, we're so proud of our city and so proud of what's been done to bring health and well-being to our different organizations. And so we thank Healthy KC for that. We're really lucky today. Healthy KC has been joined forces with the Kansas City chapter of the Academy of Culture Ambassadors, which is a national network that shares ideas and best practices for superior cultures. Also with us, we have the Mid-America Coalition on Healthcare, which is a multidisciplinary membership that promotes the health and productivity and well-being of both current and future employees and their families in the Greater Kansas City area. And we also, and very especially, we have our conversation today is being led by the Institute for Health and Productivity Management, which is a global enterprise working with employers and other stakeholders around the world to improve the health, well-being, and productivity. And in just a minute, we're going to introduce you to Sean Sullivan, the president and CEO of the Institute. We do have just a terrific participation list today. If you look at the list, we have people literally from around the world. And we're here today to talk about leadership. And that's why we invited you. And what we know is everyone on this call is a leader in the sense and practical reality of your influence, to the degree that you hone and focus your influence to encourage, enable, and empower others is the very measure of success, and the success that we have in our organizations. We know that this is just a terrifically challenging time in our life and in our work. Rules and norms are changing. They've already changed. Still, in this change, we can lean on the constancies that give us stability and strength. How we show appreciation and gratitude. The strength of our very purpose and the purpose of our organizations, and the caring and love that we have for those around us. That's where we stand right now. And as we understand today and we grapple with the reality of leadership, we uncover opportunity. We know there are certain leadership skills and behaviors that are the pathway to increase well-being, performance, and productivity. And to learn, develop, and harness these skills and behaviors, we have to be intentional. We have to pay attention and be intentional. So today we have a panel that's made this their very life's work. And it's such, I'm so happy to introduce these guys. First of all, we have Sean Sullivan. Sean, if you'll turn on your video there so people can see you. Sean is the co-founder, president, CEO of the Institute for Health and Productivity Management and its Workplace Wellness Alliance, which was created for the World Economic Forum and is now managed and sustained by the Institute. So Sean, I've known him for a long time. He's a brilliant passionate professional with an international impact. And Sean, I'm honored to introduce you and bring you to this group.
Dan, thank you. And thanks to everyone in Kansas City. I have a very fond prior history there back in the coalition days with the Mid-America Coalition. That was a long time ago when I ran the National Business Coalition on Health, but it's a great community. I hope to be there again in person after a few years, but we'll do the best we can from Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah, face to face. That'll be a nice thing pretty soon. The next person on our panel I want you all to meet is Pat Combs. You'll hook to us. Pat's coming here from, I think you're in Texas somewhere, aren't you, Pat?
Yeah. I am, yeah. Great.
Pat is a senior vice president of Teamalytics, and he is involved in providing leadership solutions to multinational corporations, both in the United States and all around the world. And my experience, but I'm astounded by his expertise and insight. And so we're really glad to have you here today, Pat, and share some of your really great thoughts and input with us. So good to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
And the third member of our panel here that we're going to be talking with is Jack Bastable. He's the president and founder of Vital Leadership. There he is. And for 40 years, Jack has collaborated with employers and providers of health and productivity services to develop strategies to impact health, well-being, and performance, primarily with teams and leaders. And everybody in Kansas City knows Jack. So there's Jack. How you doing, Jack? How's it going?
Great to be with you, Dan. And I also want to thank the Chamber and the Healthy KC and the Mid-America Coalition and Culture Ambassadors. So thanks. Great to be part of the panel and look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, good, guys. I just for all the participants that are on the line here, I don't want to spend a lot of time right now on the full biographies of these amazing, prestigious guys. Hopefully you had a chance to read about some of what they do, but because I'd have to tell you how our members on the panel have literally traveled the world to improve health and well-being and productivity, or maybe about the Olympic gold medals they've got up on their shelf, or the strategic testimony before Congress and the government ministries of the world, or the massive behavioral data that they have amassed over 500,000 behavior profiles. A lot of stuff. What we have here, what you're talking to, is a group of very experienced, high integrity, friendly, passionate individuals that humbly sit before you to have a conversation about leadership and the possibilities. So that's where we are. One other thing I want, just so you know, we do have a chat room. Everybody, I guess, by now knows how to use that. And as we're going to open the chat room, and we'll ask you to ask questions or make comments as we go along. Unbelievably, we have a talent running our chat room. Deborah Love, if you're there, Deborah. There's Deborah. Hello, Deborah. Deborah is the executive vice president and the chief operating officer and the international liaison for the Institute for Health and Productivity. So she's the one that makes all the things work, and she makes sure all the work gets completed. And she's going to be today managing and monitoring our chat room, and she's going to bring some of your comments forward as we go through this. So we got big time people running our chat room there. So thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we don't have a whole lot of time. You know, one thing with all these webinars, what we know is it's getting kind of old as people sit in their chairs for a long time. And as they say, sitting's the new smoking. So we don't want to sit here too long. But so we want to get started. And we want to start off right off the bat with just a quick polling question. Susan, our webmaster, is going to put this polling question up for us. And let's see, here we go. So the polling question is, managers in my organization encourage the development of well-being in the people they lead and coach. Very straightforward. What we'd like for you to do is go ahead and vote on that. Vote whether you strongly disagree, not sure, agree, or strongly agree. If everybody can vote on that very quickly, we're just going to take a couple seconds with this. I want to see where we stand. Here we go. Where we getting? We're landing there. Dun, 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 dun. Strongly agree is in the lead. Oh, there's agree. Bumping up. Get everybody voting here. We're going to close the poll in just a second. See where we are. Okay, we close the poll, and what we see here is we've got 52% agree and 23% strongly agree. So we got 75% that are in the upper echelon there. Now, what this doesn't surprise me because we know who's on this call. as I said, we know the leaders are on this call. You know, I've seen the list who in Kansas, just in Kansas City alone, we got Global Prairie and Advent Health and Blue Cross Blue Shield, Community America, Ability KC, CBiz locked in. We got Mercury Insurance out from California. We got a whole team from the Conscious Capitalism Group and the B Corporation organizations and Garmin and many, many more. So it's not surprising that we would have a skewed number there where we really see where people think and know that it's important to be in that leadership mode and to be really in a situation where we are leading and coaching, because that's where all the difference comes from in an organization. So we're going to talk a lot about that. So what I'd like to do is, without further ado, let's just, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that poll. Let's get started. Why don't we get started with the real brain trust here? We got these three guys here, and we want to hear what they have to say. And I'm going to start with the easiest question right off the bat, because it's really the meat of what we're talking about. We want to know in practical terms, why is leadership and leadership behaviors, why are they so critical to the workplace well-being, engagement, performance, and productivity? So right off the bat, tell us a little bit by what are we talking about? Why the heck is it important? What do you got for us, Jack?
Well, hey, Dan, we all know, and everybody that's attending today recognize that leadership is really the thing that drives an organization. Ken Blanchard once said, if optimal organizational performance is the destination, then leadership really is the engine. And so we know how important that is for all of us, and we've always really supported that. The key is how pervasive is leadership throughout the organization as it relates to supporting the health and well-being of all of our people. And so that's ultimately, we know that that's important. We also know that most recently, it published in the American Journal of Health Promotion, it was a study that looked at really taking those organizations that have completed the HERO scorecard, that's the Health Enhancement Research Organization. They really showed in that study that leadership and organizational support is by far the most important variable that impacts employee participation, improvement in health, and also in health costs. So we know it's absolutely essential.
Yeah. What do you think, Pat, in terms of how you do some of your work? What's your look at it there?
Yeah, Dan, I think it's fairly safe to say that everything rises and falls on leadership. And when you look at what's happening around the world today, my goodness, there's no better way to capture that than to see how the world is reacting and how world leaders are reacting to what's going on. And I think all of us have been in situations where we've been on a talented team and have maybe a poor leader and just didn't lead right, didn't lead well, and how that team had dysfunction and we weren't able to optimize and really truly perform as well as we could have. We've also probably been on teams where we had great leadership and probably pretty okay type of talent, and that team was able to come together and optimize. We see that often, even as we study in our Teamalytics course of action. We work with corporate, we work with military and sports teams, and we often see that with sports teams because you just see that instant, on the field production. So you see it both ways. So I think it just goes back to like everything does rise and fall on leadership.
Yeah. Sean, you've always been a leader. What's your take on this?
I better give the right definition then, Dan.
Yeah.
I'd like to back up what Jack was saying, I think, because we have found in working with employers that while leadership has certain defined roles in organizations, everybody in the organization needs to develop and display leadership qualities and behaviors. I think that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So a healthy, high-performing workforce with a high level of well-being will only happen in a culture that is led by people in designated leadership positions, but is carried forward, developed, spread, broadened, deepened by everybody exhibiting those qualities throughout the organization.
Good, yeah. And so when we're talking about leadership, it's we start with self-leadership and being able to handle that, as you're saying, Sean, but then as we work with our co-workers and our organizations and even go out into the world, it's some of the same qualities. So why don't you tell me now, just to set some of the low-hanging fruit here, if you can. Jack, why don't you start? If just in lay terms, your take, how would you even define leadership as we're talking about it here?
Well, I think, so much around that, but leadership is really more about influence than authority. So we know that when you're able to influence in positions because you really care, it's more about that, particularly today, than it's short authority. It certainly starts with making sure you're casting a vision as a leader, and you're directing where we really need to be going. I think that's ultimately the responsibility of a leader, is to show that, but then literally get behind everybody and support them in that role. Not necessarily the commanding from the front, but really supporting from the rear, making sure that everybody can do their job, take their role as a leader. And so I think that's absolutely essential. I think particularly today in this role is that leaders need to be much more vulnerable with what's going on in the world. And I think that vulnerability is really key for leaders today.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a little bit later, even some measures of how that is proven. So, what do you have to say? How about you, Pat?
Yeah, I think a great definition is, if you go back to great leadership and what great leaders do, and that's, those are folks who are willing to set aside their personal agendas, and they really do take on a greater agenda of service to others. And so it really piggybacks what Jack was saying. It's that servanthood. The leader that is transparent. They build great trust. So when you define that, I think that's really the definition of what a great leader is. And of course, I love the Army's definition too. It's the ability of people to influence others to move in the direction of a vision, a purpose, to fulfill something greater than they could on their own. And so when you see great leaders living up to that definition, you really start to understand that really is the way that a lot of great leaders look at it, from the way of being able to influence and move others. And I love that servant leadership model that Jack spoke about.
Yeah. Well, Deborah, has anybody come up with something on our chat line there? Is there somebody wanted to point out what they thought? Is there anything we need to talk about before we go on?
Yes, I would like to notice Ellen Grace Henson. She's made a comment that I think is important for everyone to hear, and that's lead from any chair, not just executive. Would anyone like to comment on that on the panel?
I think that is so essential that regardless of your role in an organization, you can be an influencer. And many times, even if the C-suite doesn't embrace all that you think they represent, you can demonstrate that by the impact you can have individually as an influencer in your division, small group, whatever it is, your team. Because I think as Pat talked about, leadership today is so much about building teams, great teams. So I think you can have an influence anywhere in the organization, not waiting around for the people that have the titles to really set the tone. I think you can do that.
Yeah, Deborah, I think it's a great question too, because we're all leading somebody, right? Even as I was raising my three sons, I would often remind them, say, guys, you're leading each other, even in the home. So we're all in charge of leadership, and we all have leadership responsibilities. It's not just positional authority.
Great. Well, Sean, I'd like to ask you a question just to get things going here on some of the nuts and bolts that we're looking at. Could you address the Workplace Wellness Alliance? You established that for the World Economic Forum and you have workplace centers as part of the Workplace Wellness Alliance that were created to advance the health and productivity management. Why now are you developing the new workplace center that has become the place to carry the mission out more successfully? So that's a real important thing that you're looking at right now through the Workplace Wellness Alliance. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Thank you, Dan. We have workplace centers that have been around for a number of years. Some are more recent. They focus on areas of health and well-being that have a particularly large impact on the workplace and on working people at all levels. They have focused on metabolic health, mental and behavioral health, respiratory health, cardiovascular health, pain management, and sleep health. These are all functional areas, but it's important to connect everything going on inside of a healthy culture in an organization with leadership, which transcends any one area of focus, be it wellness or disease management or occupational health, whatever it is. And while we have obviously worked with leaders in companies in carrying out the missions of these different centers, both at the C-suite level and down in the workplace, there's been a missing element, and it's really getting the people who are in charge of operations throughout organizations more engaged in this whole idea of a culture of health, well-being, and performance, and how leadership qualities can build that. So we are really going to be taking the idea of building this kind of culture and looking at it from the perspective of leadership qualities and behaviors.
Great. And so I'm sorry, go ahead, Deborah. You've got something? Yes.
We do. We have one question. What is the best way to gauge whether corporate leadership is improving employees' health, well-being, and performance? And how does that relate to the culture of health? Sean?
Well, that's an intriguing question. It can take us in different directions. Leadership in many companies, obviously, first and foremost, has to provide returns to shareholders and success in the marketplace. But leadership within the organization to improve its overall health and well-being, and thereby its performance, that's a slightly different sort of thing. And I really think it relates to the kind of culture that leaders build and nurture and sustain and engage many other people, like the first questioner, in becoming leaders in advancing that culture and strengthening it. So I think the culture, and there are different ways to measure the health and well-being of a culture of health. I think that's an area of measurement and of accountability where leadership can be looked at a little bit differently than just achieving financial results or shareholder returns.
And Jack, you're going to be working pretty intimately in developing this workplace center with the Institute. You want to say anything about it?
Well, I recognize the leadership that the Institute for Health and Productivity Management has had over the years, and the global reach that they have, and there's their commitment to the idea that health is really can be developed for productivity and performance. It's really a human capital asset. It was really through way back in the 90s through the Mid-America Coalition that I first learned about the Institute for Health and Productivity Management, attending a Mid-America Coalition on Healthcare meeting, and really the founder with Sean Sullivan there and Kent Peterson at the time. And so the basis of the work that they do over the years is really about performance and organizational performance. And that really comes from that perspective. So from that perspective, really want to really embrace that idea of how do we make organizations better. And it really starts with the people. It always has, but that's always been the emphasis. The whole person that not just beyond the functional health, which is really still very, very important, but really the developmental of the people in the organization, of their skills and talents, and all that they represent to impact the performance of the organization.
Right. And if the leadership isn't there, it almost doesn't matter what you're trying to do. It's difficult to take it down the road. Now, as we think about the link between leadership and the outcome of health and well-being and productivity, I'd like to draw on your experience just a little bit. Each one, Sean has been the CEO of the National Business Coalition on Health in Washington, his involvement in the World Economic Forum, and over the last 30 years running the Institute, serving a global community. And then we got Jack, who was instrumental in setting up the nation's first hospital-based wellness program nearly 40 years ago, and to this day has continued to impact health and well-being and performance. And Pat, with 30 years of really hardcore experience in behavioral analytics with the Flippin Group, Team Analytics with over 500,000 leadership profiles in your back pocket. Let's talk about this unprecedented challenge of the pandemic right now. How important is leadership in maintaining the workforce health and well-being and productivity during this nightmare that we're in? Why don't you start us off, Sean?
Thanks. Thanks, Dan. I guess you could say that leadership is just kind of, the importance of it is probably raised to a higher power, if we can use a math formula here, during this time, because organizations functioning the way they are in new and unfamiliar ways many times are creatively trying to stay together as organizations. It's much easier to do when you're managed in a way you're used to. And so many companies are now having to adapt to a different model in staying in touch with their people, in motivating them, in assuring them, in rewarding them, and in keeping them feeling good about themselves and what they're doing. So I think it just ratchets up the importance of some of those qualities of mind and of character that help us to define real leadership. Maybe a special emphasis given to the idea of empathy here and being able to connect with and understand people's situations, which are going to be very different and challenging in many different ways that you might not think about as much in the day-to-day running of a company that's not in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. How about you, Pat?
Yeah, Dan, we were, of course, in our business of consulting with leaders, we were asked to write up a lot of commentary about how they should handle this pandemic. And now that we're kind of, 6 to 8 weeks beyond when we first started really taking this serious, it's been really interesting for me to see how certain leaders have handled this with respect. They've also been able to alleviate some of the fears. And I think that's really important when you talk about well-being, and especially in the workplace. As the workforces around the world, we're having to figure out how to do things differently on the fly and pivot very quickly. What were leaders doing to help assimilate that quickly and smoothly, and then alleviate the fears of our fellow workers? I mean, that to me was some of the most incredible time that we've been through and stressors we've been through here probably in our lifetimes. And so I think as we relate that back to how certain leaders have handled that, where they said things or did things that raised stress levels and fears, I think we saw the results of that versus those who were able to speak about it in a way that gave us, at least some sense of hope and some sense of we're going to work our way out of this as we always do. So that was really revealing to us, I think, in the last probably 6 to 8 weeks of what we've seen occur.
Yeah. What do you have to say, Jack, about the whole pandemic and the leadership issue?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the great leaders are rising to the occasion. I think we've seen that. We've all listened to a lot of leadership, leaders from our own organizations and from around the world, and leaders of countries and states and all around. And so we're really seeing that in evidence. I think, as Pat pointed out, those are really providing hope, which is really very, very important. But also just the recognition that, we're all going through a second pandemic, and that pandemic is really having the dis-ease that all of us have, and it's going to continue. I mean, and so as they recognize that, and also the idea that we have these personal lives. I mean, one of the things that's been such a positive thing is that all of us have recognized more than before that we all have personal lives. We're all sitting here, right now, sitting in our rooms and home and all around. And so we see that in our personal lives. I think that's the recognition of leadership of that, and the continuation of that is really going to be essential through this time. That's not going away anytime soon. It's not, and it's changing significantly. So yeah.
And Deborah, there's the chat line's buzzing. What do we got going there?
It is indeed. First, let's give a shout out to Karen Finn. She made a comment, leadership is a mindset, not a title. And I think that's been well addressed here in your comments on the panel. We do have a question relative to COVID from Thomas McCoy. What will leaders need to do differently post-COVID?
Anybody want to answer that? I say really quickly, just jump in. I'm not on the panel, but I just think it's really interesting that the organizations that really have nailed their purpose, they know what their purpose is. their purpose hasn't changed during COVID. What they have to do is that through their leadership, they're coming up with different strategies to achieve their purpose. And so the really great leaders, that's what they're latching onto. They know what they're supposed to do. They know what they're trying to do as an organization. They have very strong purpose, and that is filtered down in all the employees in the organization and what the purpose is. And now there's a lot of adjustment to be made because of all the limitations and new opportunities that we have. And so the leaders that really have their feet firm on the ground, understand the purpose of their organization. Now it's just a matter, okay, we got some movement to do. We got some changes to make. We got some opportunities to take care of here, but let's go forward. We got the same purpose. So.
Yeah, could I jump in, Dan? Thank you very much for starting it off while we thought about that. I think there are two things that occur to me. One is that communications with employees are going to be more important than ever. Consistently, persistently, and to go back to what both Pat and Jack said, to make sure that hope predominates over fear going forward. That's a big one. The other one is this is going to really give an exclamation point to all the efforts that so many of you participating in this webinar have been making for years to improve the health of employees, because better health is going to be one of our best defenses going forward against these kind of risks in the future.
Yeah, good.
I'd like to just comment also on that, because I think the leaders, as you mentioned, Dan, around purpose, back in October or back in August of 2019, the CEO Roundtable really adopted a much broader concept in business around stakeholder capitalism. And that really embraces all the customers, the employees, the customers, the environment, communities, all of those things, and really around purpose. And so I think there's going to be an important part of the future is a greater emphasis on that and seeing the connection for our purpose, because it really defines everyone. And so I think that will be a much stronger emphasis for us in that area.
Yeah, it's definitely not a sign on the wall. It's really the engine.
Yeah.
So, did you have something, Deborah?
I do. This is thank you, Lisa Cooper, for your question. This is a follow-up on Pat's comment and the previous question. What metrics have you used to measure culture besides a company's productivity? Have you measured presenteeism versus absenteeism and that role in a healthy culture?
Yeah, Deborah, no doubt. That's a great follow-up, and it's a great leading question. I think she must have had our script here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know, Dan, we're going to talk about that in terms of what leadership behaviors look like, productive behaviors versus things that get in the way. And that's a great question, and I think it leads us right into what we're talking about here.
Yeah, let's go do that. But really quick, Sean, do you want to say anything about presenteeism, since you've really been all over that for the last 20 years?
Suffer from it myself too, Dan, but presenteeism, we've been saying for a long time, is larger than measured absence. It's more difficult to measure, but it's so important. And I think it's becoming even more important now as people increasingly, and some going forward as well, are not going to be, quote, present necessarily at an actual workplace, maybe as much as they were for a while anyway. So keeping track of how people are functioning, their functional capacity, is really what presenteeism measures, or the decline in it is what presenteeism is. So I think we're going to have to pay more attention to this with a workforce that's going to be working somewhat differently for some time yet.
Yeah, good. So one of the things that we know, we'll get into this here, we know that great leadership is intentional, and it involves learning and development, and that's a good thing. That means that we all can go there. And so I'd like to ask Jack and Pat specifically, when we talk about leadership, we're really talking about some behaviors or skills that are recognized and should be included in a great leader as they've been measured and verified. And then Pat, even going a little bit further, we also know counterproductive behaviors that are at war with these good behaviors. So Jack, why don't you start off with some of the behaviors that we've that really have shown up with some of the data and stuff that we're talking about here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. You know, I am studying leadership for a long time. You know, it's and leadership, by the way, is about a $1 trillion industry, leadership development in this country, which is kind of mind-boggling. There's been so much emphasis on it, but if you ask a lot of CEOs, haven't really gained a lot of traction in some cases. So they're still trying to find some methods. And there's a number of different name brands out there around leadership. Transformational leadership, authentic leadership, moral leadership, modern leadership, servant leadership. But a lot of the common behaviors and attributes, building trust, serving others first, celebrating diversity and inclusion, listening, humility, caring, empathy, all of those are fabulous ideas of behaviors to be identified. And I like what Patrick Lencioni, the best-selling author, talks about responsibility-centered leadership. I think one of the things, though, that when we were always in the wellness business, and we started, is that if we would just download a ton of information for people, they're going to change their behaviors. We learned that wasn't the truth. That didn't happen. You really need, and Ben Franklin had the quote once. He said, "Learning does not occur until behaviors are changed." And so personally, I'm really attracted to this idea of vital behaviors and those things that ultimately can be measured so that we can improve on those. And I think that as was referenced, it's really a mindset around that first. But then also, once you get a mindset around the concepts, it's really then becomes a skill set. And you need to develop those skills, and that really comes down to behavior. So Pat, I think, can maybe give us a little more illumination on what behaviors we're talking about and how you
we're going to talk in a second about how those are measured, which, if you can't measure it, you can't do it. But Pat, first talk about the counterproductive behaviors as that really beat us down when we're trying to work with serving first and trusting and those kind of things.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And Jack, that's a great answer too, because I think there is so much information about leadership and how to lead and looking at concepts. My goodness, I've read every leadership book out there, and they're all great concepts and things we can learn from those. But it gets down to behavior, and it's exactly what you're talking about, Dan. When you think about even the definition of culture, right? What is culture? I think the most simple definition I can think of is culture really is a set of behaviors that we either teach or we tolerate. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, then why are we spending so much time on personality, for example, trying to identify people's personalities? I think personality is important. I think it's good to know your personality, but that's not going to make a difference in terms of your leadership culture. Why do we pay attention to just doing culture index and gathering information? That's not going to make the difference. Once you get the information, what are you doing with it? And I think, Dan, what we're talking about here is the behaviors that are productive behaviors that lead to a better work environment, lead to better well-being, more engagement with your employees, versus those things that get in the way. And that part of behavior I don't think is talked about enough or tended to enough, because people think counterproductive behaviors, it just kind of has this negative connotation with it, right? I look at it as a huge positive. I look at it when we identify what is getting in the way of our leadership or our performance, and we can do something about that. To me, that's a tremendous growth opportunity. And I'll just give you one quick example, Dan. I know you're going to love this because you're a big Chiefs fan, right?
Yeah.
But we were at the Combine in 2017 for the NFL draft, and we had a number of quarterbacks that came through. Obviously, we were doing their data, measuring their behaviors. We get hired by a number of NFL teams to provide that feedback. Well, we met this young man who was eventually drafted by the Chiefs, and I was just blown away when he walked in the room. He carried with him a presence. He immediately shook my hand, and looked at me in my eye. He was just the first impression he gave was, wow, this guy is really well put together. And then we get his data back, and it was—
Wait a second, what was that guy's name?
Some guy named Pat Mahomes. I don't know, Super Bowl champion. Yeah, right. But tremendous leader, tremendous young man. But I never forget when we got his data back, and I was looking through it. I mean, obviously some incredible strengths in his behavioral data. But there were two key things that we picked up on that were not, I would say, huge counterproductive behaviors, but things he really needed to pay attention to as he went into the Chiefs locker room. And I remember having a brief conversation with him because I asked him, I said, hey, Pat, what are you going to do with these things here that you see in your data? He says, well, my agent told me to do this. And I said, hey, man, with all due respect to your agent, I think that's the exact opposite you should be doing. You go into that locker room, you take control of that locker room by your engagement, by going in and meeting every one of your teammates, by introducing yourself, but create that strong presence just like you did with me as you walked into this combine room. And to watch him and what he did with that, Dan, and look, I'm not taking credit for anything Pat Mahomes has done. He's incredible. But there was just a couple of tweaks there behaviorally that he did that I think made a huge difference for that team when he first arrived in Kansas City. And I think that's, again, going back to the counterproductive side of that, it was just a growth opportunity for him as a young player coming into the NFL. Be able to get that data and that feedback and to do something with it was extremely powerful.
So one of the things you're able to do is actually measure those counterproductive behaviors. But if they go unaddressed, what's the likely results? That's all downhill, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, if first of all you're not aware of what that counterproductive behavior is, it's going to continue to affect you, right? Until maybe it's a coworker, it's somebody who really cares about you, has the guts enough to come up and say, hey, when you're overbearing in a meeting, or when you speak in this way with this tone, and do you not see what it does to the team, right? But getting that kind of feedback, it's difficult, especially when you're talking uphill to somebody. So when you think about that whole loop of how you grow through something like that, absolutely, you can get feedback about it if people have the guts enough to come up and talk to you about it, or you simply use a measurement tool, a behavioral tool, something like what we have at Teamalytics to help you identify what that is, and then obviously to get some great coaching and some accountability behind that. That's what truly creates the change.
Yeah, it's great that it's measurable. Talking about verifiable results, let's keep talking about that a little bit. Jack, one of the things that you've taken on is to help develop the Vital Workplace Center for the Institute for Health and Productivity Management. As you look at that, what you found out and what we've talked about a lot is leadership styles can be evaluated almost as a continuum, like you were talking about, all the way from the coercive command and control model, that almost a Hitler type, to a modern coaching and purpose-driven model. And there's a lot in between there. But there seems to be a clear link between the different types of leadership and the health and productivity and the performance of the workforce. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What have we found out about that?
Well, I did a little research, and OC Tanner, who's a rewards and culture development company, as in their research is really, they basically say that we're really at a leadership tipping point today because it's so important for us. There's like 10,000 of us baby boomers. They're retiring every day. That's not us, by the way, even though we're part of maybe that cohort. But so leadership is absolutely essential and it's powerful, particularly as it relates to teams. But as they look at the old form of leadership, the command and control that you talked about versus what they define as modern leadership, which is really what we're talking about, where it's really much more of a caring, nurturing, mentoring, coaching, connecting type of leadership. When they did when they researched organizations that had those different kinds of leadership, they found that it really impacted almost every metric that was important to the organization. Overall employee experience, greater purpose in the organization, people feeling they had greater opportunities, well-being certainly was impacted, feeling of success, engagement, people feeling much more appreciated, performance, and even directly related to revenue. So this idea that of the kind of leadership we're talking about, of much more of a servant type leadership and understanding the behaviors that are going to lead to that are really, that's really what impacts the performance of an organization in a lot of different ways.
Yeah,
so
absolutely direct relationship, measurable and big numbers. Yeah,
I would also say one other area, and this was kind of interesting that because when we got into when wellness moved towards well-being, many of us used the book that was written by Tom Rath and others at Gallup when he was at Gallup still about well-being, and so much research that he did about that. But Gallup then came around and said their number one finding in their 80-year history was the influence that managers and leaders have on people in their organization. And so there's so much evidence out there to support why good leadership and how that influences that. It's let's just focus on those behaviors and let's really focus on areas. That's why I think I appreciate we're having this conversation, because it's so relevant.
Looks like you got a question for us, Deborah.
I actually have several. So we're going to stay on topic with Jack right now.
Good.
The first question is, are there situations different enough so that corporate leadership should be more authoritarian in some instances, but more participative in others?
Well, one of the things that I know Ken Blanchard always talks about when he talks about servant leadership is it's not a soft kind of leadership. I mean, you holding people accountable is really important in leadership, but really supporting people and listening to people. I don't think that's we're at a time right now. People are trying to get together and figure out, how do you go back to work at the Ford Motor Company? Guess what? They're asking the workers to participate in that. They're not. It's not like they're sitting. The executives are sitting around a room and saying, "This is how we're going to do it." Everybody that's going to be a part of that needs to be part of that conversation at every level in the organization. Needs to have that input. People need to have input. So I don't think there's any situation at all that is going to be a command and control situation. I think we're out of that era. I think we're absolutely out of that era.
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. I think that Rubicon has been crossed a long time ago. And when I think of authoritarian leadership, I think of somebody who is that command control leader. It's do as I say. Just take commands from me, get the job done. And even our military has shifted from that type of a leadership style. And so you're exactly right. And it's not soft. What we're talking about. I think today's modern leadership, the ones who do it really well, are folks who are transparent. They really care about their people. They connect with their people. So there's that high need to nurture, but the high need to nurture doesn't lead necessarily to softness unless they overplay that strength. Yeah. And what it leads to is better team connectivity and better communication, and folks who aren't fearful or scared to raise an objection when they have a disagreement. That's the type of culture that we're talking about. And it's very much different from probably most of the leadership styles that we grow up with or were taught as young people. But to me today, it's much further advanced, and it's a way better way to build an organization. I think we're seeing it play out in the numbers, the profitability, the connectedness to the team as well.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there isn't authoritarian, coercive leadership. There still is much of it out there. And sometimes it works short term. You can get things you need to have done, you get them done short term, but then over the long haul, all of a sudden you see your employee well-being, and you see trust, and you see collaboration, and you see teamwork, and you see all those things kind of disappearing from your organization, and you see people leaving the organization. So it's a pretty big issue there. So did you have something else, Deborah?
I do, and I think this is to everyone. It goes back to Pat's discussion about measuring and changing behaviors. Are there resources you would recommend related to measuring presenteeism?
Do you want to answer that, Sean?
I'm happy to.
You said Pat, but I know you know the answer.
Presenteeism is essentially based on self-reported information. See, this is one of the things about trying to measure productivity and relate it to health. It's hard now to measure productivity the way we used to in the old days by counting the number of things someone does in a certain period of time. Most work is not that way anymore. So we have to really rely upon people's assessment of how well they're functioning with respect to certain issues they may be having. In our case, we're looking at health issues. But there are several very well developed and validated tools that are used worldwide based on self-report information that we can use to translate into the impact of all kinds of health issues on functionality and ultimately on performance. The key is realizing that we're not measuring productivity when we measure presenteeism. We're measuring functional impairment, which can happen because of all kinds of issues, depression, pain, you name it. When we're able to do that and then focus in on trying to improve, reduce that impairment, and use these tools, we can translate that into productivity gains.
Good, good. Let's talk about measuring behaviors for a second. Pat, one of the big things, what you can hang on your hook is behavioral analytics. It's kind of a cool term. I like behavioral analytics, and it's the key to a lot what you do for clients, where you actually can measure leadership behaviors. And tell us a little bit about that, and how does that work, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So years ago, we started getting into executive coaching and development and helping try to bring out the best in people. And what our leadership found at our company was that the personality type profiles were not getting us there. It was helpful information, but it wasn't turning the dial in terms of helping somebody to develop and improve. So we developed our own proprietary tool that really focused in on the measurement of key leadership and performance behavioral scales. And when we break those measurements down, it does a couple of things for us. One, it gives us really keen insight into how that person really is experienced by others. One of the key differentiators for us is not just taking a self-measurement. Self-assessments are great, but Dan, we all have blind spots, right? I don't know myself perfectly well, and most people don't. So what's really important for me is to get that 360 feedback. And so when I can get 6, 7, 8 coworkers who know me well in a work environment to fill out a behavioral assessment that takes about 10 to 12 minutes, then I get an abundance of information back on the things that they experience with me that they can see that I do well, but also those things that maybe I don't do so well, that I need some improvement on behaviorally. And when I can take that information and do something with it in terms of a growth plan, and then have some accountability built behind it, then what we've seen is that's where leaders really start to move the dial in terms of performance and how they interact with their teams. And it's really cool to see, because it really does accelerate growth with individuals, but also with their teams.
So it sounds like it takes a long time. How do you accelerate it? How do you accelerate the growth when you're looking at measuring these behaviors and need to nurture and grow it? How do you accelerate it?
Yeah, it's a process, right? And then when you say process, everybody goes, oh my gosh, that's going to take years. Well, it doesn't have to take years. In fact, it can take even as little as a few weeks to a few months and depending on which behavior they're trying to grow. But if they have some strong accountability, so the first piece of that is become aware, right? Have a tool, have some type of feedback introduction to where you can get the right information. So it's important that you identify the right area you want to grow. And then really to build some accountability within that. So have some strong coaching. Again, going back to sports, there's a reason why pro athletes have specific coaches in almost every area of their life now, right? They have a nutritionist, they have a weight trained strength coordinator, they've got a trainer. I mean, they've got specific coaches for different things. And for us in the workforce, we can have strong coaching as well. Either from the outside, a third party coming in, or develop within the company. But then to accelerate that growth, it's building that accountability piece in, but also having those check-ins, right? How are you doing with that growth plan? Once that plan's built, you have an idea what you're trying to grow, then that's where the acceleration comes in with that strong accountability. So everything in terms of growth is a process, but it can be sped up when you have the right pieces in place to help accelerate it.
So it is a process, and it is teachable, and it is learnable.
Right.
And, good. That's great. Let's talk for just a second about some success examples, if anybody can. Talk about a few examples or practical applications of improved well-being, engagement, or performance through leadership, learning, and growth. You got anything on that, Jack or Sean or Pat?
One of the great examples that I read about was Cheryl Bachelder, who was the CEO of Popeyes. And, we think of Popeyes and says, is that healthy food at Popeyes? And I think almost every restaurant you can probably find a healthy option. But anyway, she really developed her leadership team and focused on that, and had incredible outcomes. So that would be one example. I know you mentioned early on Mercury Insurance. Their leaders, 96 years old, still works most days, and really has been a servant leader and a caring leader entire career, and they've really had some great outcomes as a result of their leadership and commitment of their leadership. And then since Pat's on the call, I became aware of this organization, a minor league team called the Savannah Bananas. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. Savannah Bananas. I Googled that, and they have an incredible success story about their commitment in the kind of leadership that they offer, and the caring of their customers and the culture of the community. It's a great example. So those are just a few.
Yeah, Dan, I could chip in with one very large corporate one. And we've worked with we tend to work with larger companies that are multinationals. And the one that for many years set the standard for most others was Dow Chemical. And it happened because they essentially held operating people, and this is why we're emphasizing the importance of looking at operating management here. They held operating people in their facilities around the world accountable. One of their measures was the health and well-being of their workforce and how it related to their performance. Other companies have done that. Unilever has done it also. And it makes a world of difference, because then you have the people who are directly responsible for results, shall we say, the kind of results that translate into financial success through operations. They are paying attention to the connection between that success and the health and well-being of the people they're responsible for. And these really have been the missing people in so many efforts to improve the overall health of a corporation. I remember many years ago, the famous study at Lockheed Martin that found that the number one reason for back pain was people's bad relations with their supervisors. That sounds crazy, but it was true. It's an excuse in some ways, but it also is a source of pain. So it's very important in any organization to have operating people tied into measurement and accountability for the health and well-being of the people they're responsible for.
Great.
I've got
What do you got on the line there, Deborah? I'm sorry, Pat, did you have something?
Oh, just a quick story on a leader we worked with here a few months ago at an energy company in Houston. He was in a leadership role, CEO type role, and great, very smart, intelligent engineer type of a leader. Placed in this role because he was a high performer. Just did not have some of the leadership qualities in terms of connection and building high trust and those types of things that he needed in that role. And we were able to coach him up, and he really became a tremendous leader in about 3 months in terms of just connecting with his team, learning how to tone down some of his critical remarks in meetings. He would still deliver them, he just wouldn't do it quite the way he did before. So, but it was, again, him becoming more aware of some specific behaviors that were not working well for him, and then him getting some strong coaching and developing through that. It was really fun to watch because he got it. He said, look, I know I need to grow. And in terms of growing leaders, that's all you need to hear is somebody who says, I want to grow and get better. And typically those are the best clients.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of moving through our time really quick. I have about 17 or 18 stories just about companies in Kansas City. I'd really like to talk about Ability KC and Global Prairie and some of them, because there's a lot of great examples. And here we'll talk about those later. Kansas City. Deborah, do you have something else for us? I really saw a lot of questions coming through.
They're rolling in. How important is a cross-silo perspective to leadership, Sean?
Oh boy, it's absolutely critical, because the only people who can get us across silos are not going to be necessarily leaders within those silos who have to be effective at what they do, but those whose responsibilities are broader than a particular silo. I long ago gave up criticizing people for being in silos. That's the way a lot of work gets done in a lot of organizations. So rather than saying we got to break down those silos, what we have to do is connect those silos. And leadership is the key to doing that. So there has to be leadership capability and a role assigned to making sure that we are not pitting the organization against itself, which is the worst, of course, of what happens when you're too siloed. But you have effective operations in different areas, all aiming toward what a great leader also has to provide, and that's a common objective or a vision for the organization.
Great.
A couple more things. I just want to note Thomas McCoy. He's shared several comments. He said trust can be developed if the leader exhibits two things, consistency and caring. And then going back to Pat's comments, he had a client who developed a culture of partnership as a result of an enlightened leader, but then a more self-interested CEO took charge. What can a company do when something like this causes the culture to collapse?
Good question, Deborah. So we work with a lot of private business owners as well. And I think one of the things I learned long ago with even private business owners who are more self-interested, maybe they're focused on making as much money as they can, or focused on creating the greatest company they can, but they don't tend to their people well. And I remember asking this particular leader one day, I said, look, you've got about 150 employees. I said, you do know you can be fired. And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? This is my company. I own my company. They can't fire me. I said, well, sure you can. Your good people can walk away from this job and leave you. And you're, in a sense, you've been fired as a leader. And, sometimes it takes that. It takes somebody having to go through some trauma or tragedy like that, where good people just don't put up with that type of leadership style and they leave. And we counsel folks all the time. If you're under a tyrant and it's just causing, all kinds of stress in your life, is it really worth it? Even if you're making a few extra bucks, is it really worth it to put yourself through that? So I think it's a great question, but I think it's all a choice we have to make. What kind of leaders do we want to be? And are we willing to grow? And are we willing to put up with stuff from other people that we probably shouldn't be putting up with?
Yeah, great.
And in relation to trust, it's a critical factor for psychological safety. This is from Nancy Spangler.
I knew that.
Sometimes that gets lost when accountability and performance metrics become a major focus. How can leaders balance this?
Jack, you've got that one, don't you?
Well, I think trust is the foundation of every single relationship that you have. And so you really have got to be who you are, totally transparent, build that honesty, caring, all those things. Yeah. So you can't compromise. That can't be anything compromised even once, because once you do that, you really destroy this trust in relationship. So yeah, and creating that psychological safety workplace in teams, we know that is like foundational for teams to feel safe, to be able to comment, be able to share a thought at any time and not feel and be safe to be able to do that. I think that's the era we're in, feeling safe to share what we're thinking and not worrying about that we're going to be ridiculed or looked on. So anyway, trust is really important.
So, Pat, even the trust, that's what lack of trust is one of those destructive behaviors, isn't it? That you measure and look at.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, I think I agree with Jack. Yeah, the foundation of high performance all comes on the basis of trust. When you have a team that understands what honesty, integrity, and being able to give good, honest feedback to each other, those are the teams that outperform typically. So absolute agreement.
Do we have time for one more?
What, one more?
Okay. Ellen Grace Henson has written, in a statement last year from the Business Roundtable, the list of corporate stakeholders was greatly expanded beyond shareholders to include employees, customers, partners, supply chain, local and larger community. How does this impact approach to corporate health and well-being?
And I want to comment on that because I love the direction. The editor of Fortune magazine talks to CEOs all over the place, and there was some concern about, okay, this new concept of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism is really changing, evolving. And he says definitely, most definitely, that there's a change in leadership in this country today around that concept and how important that is. And really what that does, that kind of leadership, and just embraces the whole world and the whole person at the same time. And so I think it's very consistent with total well-being and support. Very, very, very consistent with that. So I'm excited to see that movement. And one of the things I know, Sean, you might comment on that, because Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum, and who there's some work that you do through their Workplace Wellness Alliance, really started that conversation back in the 70s. And it's really become to fruition today. So I think it's just part of caring about people today. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think the move toward recognizing more stakeholders is a good move, because it extends the healthy culture of business organizations out into the larger community. But, there are those who are naysayers about this. I think it's going to be more of a challenge going forward, Jack, coming out of this global crash of the world economy that is unprecedented, that it literally has been stopped in its tracks. It's going to be an enormous challenge for CEOs to pay attention to more than getting back into the black, shall we say, out of the red for those who invest. It's going to be a huge challenge, but it's never more important to pay attention to the psychological health and well-being of the workforce than it is right now. So I'd say if there is I'm not sure I'd want to be the CEO of some of these companies right now, because they are going to have a very big hill to climb in getting back to profitability and having to pay even closer attention to what Nancy Spangler asked about, the psychological health and well-being of the workforce.
Yeah. One thing that we know, we've got several people on the line, I know, from Conscious Capitalism and the B Corp, and this that's the fundamental part of how they see running their businesses and organizations. And the question first is, who do I serve? And when they answer that question, that's where it comes from. And then they've been able to have a lot of success with that. I'd like to see if each one of you have something that you would want to point out that you to really kind of wrap it up for you. What's really a strong point you'd like to make, each one of you.
Yeah, I'll go first. I love what Sean just said, because I don't think we're ever going to go back to whatever norm was three months ago, right? I think we have an opportunity around the globe to go back to something better, and that really means how we take care of people around us, and not just in the workplace. Absolutely. We should be doing that and thinking about what will better look like and how do we do that. Maybe this is the reset that we've been given to think differently, to behave differently, to treat others better than we have before. And that's my prayer for the globe, is that corporately, governments, corporations around the globe will look at this as a way to make something better that is obviously a serious tragedy that's befallen the world here. But I think we have an opportunity to do that.
Great. How about you, Sean?
An important thing for me is to understand that I used to be one of those who believed that leaders were born and not made, before I encountered folks like you and Jack and Pat, and paid more attention to leadership as a skill. I still think there are certain kinds of leaders, Winston Churchill would spring to mind. You can't make a Winston Churchill, but those are extreme examples. So it's very important to know that wherever we are in our organizations and whatever we're doing, leadership qualities and skills can be developed, and the organization and the individuals will be much richer for that.
I just like to end with, incredible challenging time. No question about that. We know that the industry that we're in about caring for people is going to get bigger all the time. So that's part of what we've been discussing about, because leadership is about caring. So I think there's incredible opportunities for us going forward. So I really am encouraged about the future, despite the challenges that we're currently involved in. There's no question. I mean, there's a lot of hurting people and struggling and lost jobs and all that kind of stuff. It's really tough times. But I think there are some great opportunities for all of us. So I see those for sure.
Well, our chat line, Deborah is running our chat line, and we have such great questions and comments. I can tell you from everybody who's listening, we're keeping all of the questions and comments that you had, and we're going to try to do something in the future with them. But Deborah, did you have one last thing that you wanted, something important from the chat line?
I do. I thought it was a very great end question, actually. And it is from Greg. And I apologize, I can't pronounce your last name. I'll probably butcher it, but Frana. I'd like to know what experience served as one of the most significant growth opportunities for each of the panelists, which made them a better leader. And Danny, I think that includes you.
Oh, gee whiz. I would, unfortunately, I'm going to say something that's a little bit, stereotype, but most of my growth came in the world of sports. I learned what teamwork was. I learned what hard work was. I learned what respect was. I learned all those things. And I learned that mostly I really learned about the things Nancy Spangler talked about, trust. And, if I'm playing linebacker and if the defensive tackle doesn't go down on that lineman, I'm going to have my knee blown out. So anyway, I learned a lot in sports and I was able to bring it forward. And then once I got out of sports, I ran into some people and I was able to be mentored by people that were just great minds and great people. And, some of them you can see on these pictures that you're looking at right now, some great people that, so for me, sports world, and then sports is more black and white. And so it's pretty straightforward. How about you guys?
Yeah, Dan, I'll just first say it's been an honor to be here with Sean and Jack and you and Deborah. What a great panel. And thank you so much for the honor of joining you guys today. And I'll tell you a quick story about a mentor. And I learned a ton in sports as well, Dan, but had a mentor, a guy named Flip Flippin, who was the founder of the Flipping Group, who is our founder for Teamalytics as well. It wasn't 3 months after I got to know Flip that we were driving down the highway. I was taking him to a speaking event. And he was mentoring and teaching me all along the way. And this was one of those days. He after about 15 minutes on the road, he asked me for my cell phone. And I gave him my cell phone thinking maybe he's just going to look at the brand or what type of cell phone it was. And he opens up my cell phone and starts playing with it. And I'm like, what is he doing? And he says, hey, I got a quick question for you. On a 1 to 10, how are you doing in your marriage? I said, well, Flip, that's kind of a personal question. I haven't known you that long. He says, well, look, you're working for me. It's a leadership development company. I want you to be the best you can be in every facet of your life. So 1 to 10, how are you doing in your marriage? I said, Flip, my marriage is great, 9.5. And he left it alone for a while. And I'm like, okay, I'd like my phone back. And he said, no, just keep driving. And about 10 minutes later, he dials a number, puts the phone up to his ear. And he said, hey, Christina, this is Flip. I'm with Pat. Everything's okay. We're driving down the highway. We were having a great conversation about your marriage. So on a 1 to 10, just tell me, how are things going? 10 being high. And my face is about to explode right now. I'm going, what is this guy doing? And I'm literally trying to pull the phone away from him. And he keeps, pushing me aside. And he said, so Christina, what's the score? A 4? Really? Well, tell me what's going on. I'm like, does she have any idea what she's doing right now? Well, we get done. He gets done with a phone call, and he said, look, Pat, I don't care that she gave you a 4. It's not going to be a 4 next week, is it? We've got some work to do. And I'll just tell you, that was a turning point in my marriage, but it was a turning point for me as a person who considered himself a good leader and a nurturing leader, because I obviously was not taking care of my bride at home, and Flip reminded me of how to do that. In fact, in the next 6 months, I had to call him every Friday afternoon and give him a score. And not my score, it was Christina's score on me. So that's what I'm talking about. When you talk about accountability and measurement and growing behaviors, there's no better way to do that. And Flip modeled that for me that day.
Great. How about you, Sean?
Actually, I'd like to go last. You'll find out.
Okay,
Yeah,
Jeff.
no, let me just build on what Pat was saying, because my number one mentor was really, it was an experience with Ken Blanchard. And he always used the term feedback is the breakfast of champions, which is really what Pat is talking about. You got to really ask for feedback. You got to really understand, how am I doing, and be willing and open to do that, because that's really a mark of a leader. And I saw the humility that a guy that's a world-renowned author, and how he really looked for feedback all the time, and so that to me was a real turning point in my career. And that was early on that I had an experience with him So I was really grateful for that opportunity.
Good. You're up, Sean.
Well, okay. I wanted to go last because unlike my fellow panelists and you, Dan, you've all been professional athletes, and I think there are wonderful lessons to be learned from sports. I was not a professional athlete, but I think my high school football coach taught me the value of sacrifice for the team a long, long time ago. And I forgot it for a while in my life, I have to admit. But I have been led by others in my life to remember it. But it really goes back to that, to me, the ultimate team sport. And it's the good of the team. So if a leader can have that in mind, like a great quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, that is the kind of leadership that that can be modeled for us.
That's great. Well, we're getting near the end here. And, you know, as leaders, all of you, I know each one of you are confident that there's going to be a time for this danger that we're in right now to pass. We know as people and we know as organizations that we're all going to come together again. When we do, we're going to grieve our losses. We're going to make new choices. We're going to dream new dreams. We're going to create new ways to live and to work and to heal. We'll each embrace and serve our own personal, professional leadership roles, because as leaders, this is the covenant that you all make with life. So I want to thank Sean and Pat and Jack and Deborah and Madison, and we really look forward to being face-to-face again pretty soon. I want to have Brandy Riggs come up front here. Brandy is the Director of Human Resources at McCown Gordon Construction, one of Kansas City's greatest companies. And Brandy is the force that brings these gatherings together for Healthy KC, and she's going to kind of tie the knot for us. So thanks for everybody being here. Great group.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Dan, and your partnership with Culture Ambassadors. Big thank you to Sean, Pat, Jack, and Deborah for sharing your time and expertise with Healthy KC today. Thank you to Blue KC, Locked In, Reach Healthcare Foundation, and all of our Healthy KC sponsors. As Madison mentioned at the beginning, this webinar was recorded and we'll be sending out a link, and the link will also be posted to the Chamber's YouTube page as well. Our next Healthy KC webinar will be on May 20th at 9:30, and it's on the topic of the KC Workplace Mental Health Assessment. And so we'll spend some time looking into the data provided through the assessment by all the local organizations, and then dig into what a few local organizations are doing in terms of mental well-being with their teams right now. All of our Healthy KC networking forums for the remainder of 2020 will be in this format. So we have gone virtual for the year. Our next networking forum will be in Q3, sometime early to mid-September. So we're looking forward to that. And thank you all again for joining us, and take care and stay well.